I was babysitting for the Thompsons one night. They lived in this quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where nothing ever really happened. The kids, Lily and Max, were already in bed by 8 p.m., and the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. It was a pretty easy gig, and I was looking forward to the extra cash. Around 9 p.m., the phone rang. It was a landline, which felt odd in this day and age. I picked it up, expecting Mrs. Thompson to check in or something. "Hello?" I said. There was silence on the other end, but I could hear someone breathing. After a few seconds, the caller hung up. I shrugged it off, thinking it was probably a wrong number. About 20 minutes later, the phone rang again. I answered, and this time, a man's voice spoke. "Did you check on the kids?" he asked. My heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Just check on the kids," he repeated, then hung up. I rushed upstairs to the kids' rooms. They were both sound asleep, undisturbed. I checked the windows and doors, making sure everything was locked. Trying to shake off the unease, I went back downstairs. The phone rang again. My hands were trembling as I picked it up. "Did you lock the back door?" the voice asked. I froze. "Who are you? How do you know about the back door?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Just make sure it's locked," he said, and hung up again. I sprinted to the back door, double-checking the lock. It was secure. I was starting to panic now. I didn't have the Thompsons' cell numbers, so I couldn't call them. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Someone's calling me and it's creepy? The phone rang again, making me jump. I let it ring a few times before picking up. "I see you checked the back door," the man said. "Good girl. Stop calling me." I shouted. "What do you want?" He laughed, a low, chilling sound. "I want to play a game. Let's see how well you know the house." I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking. I grabbed a kitchen knife and started checking all the windows and doors again. Everything was locked, but I still felt exposed, like he was watching me. The phone rang again. I didn't want to answer it, but I had to. Maybe I could reason with him, find out what he wanted. "Leave me alone," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Go to the living room window," he said. "Look outside." I crept to the window and peeked through the curtains. The street was empty, not a single person in sight. "I'm not outside," he said, his voice mocking. "I'm inside." My blood ran cold. I dropped the phone and grabbed the kids. Lily and Max were groggy and confused, but I told them we had to go. I didn't explain why, just that it was important. I herded them downstairs, towards the front door. As I reached for the doorknob, the phone rang again. I ignored it, focusing on getting the kids out of the house. But the ringing stopped, and then a voice came from behind me. "Leaving so soon?" I spun around. There was no one there, but the voice had come from the phone, now off the hook and lying on the floor. I grabbed it, my hands trembling. "What do you want?" I screamed into the receiver. "To make sure you never forget this night," he said, and the line went dead. I got the kids out of the house and ran to the neighbors. They called the police, who arrived within minutes. The officers searched the house from top to bottom but found no one. They said the calls must have come from a disposable phone, and there was nothing they could do. The Thompsons came home to find the house surrounded by police cars. They were horrified and apologized profusely. I never found out who the caller was or how he knew so much about the house. I quit babysitting after that. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of knowing that someone had been inside the house with me and the kids. Every time I heard a phone ring, my heart would race, and I'd remember that voice. It's been years, but I still check the locks every night and keep my phone close. I never want to feel that helpless again, waiting for someone to make their next move. I was babysitting for the Johnsons one evening. They lived in a rural farmhouse, surrounded by fields and woods, miles away from the nearest neighbor. The isolation never bothered me much. It was peaceful, and the kids, Sarah and Tommy, were well behaved. Around 8 p.m., after putting the kids to bed, I settled down in the living room with a book. The silence was almost comforting, only broken by the occasional creak of the old house settling. An hour passed uneventfully until I noticed headlights sweeping across the front yard. I glanced out the window and saw an unfamiliar car parked by the driveway. I frowned. The Johnsons hadn't mentioned expecting anyone, and it wasn't typical for visitors to drop by unannounced, especially at night. A man got out of the car, stood there for a moment, looking at the house. He then walked towards the front door. My heart started to race. He knocked, a loud, insistent sound that echoed through the quiet house. I hesitated but went to the door, leaving it locked. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm looking for something in the house." "I'm a relative of the Johnsons," the man replied. His voice was rough, impatient. I peered through the peephole. The man looked disheveled, his clothes dirty, and his eyes shifting nervously. I didn't recognize him, and his claim didn't sit right with me. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson didn't mention anyone coming by. "I can't let you in," I said firmly. There was a pause, then the man's tone turned hostile. "I'm not leaving until I get what I came for. Open the door." I backed away, my hands shaking. The kids were upstairs, unaware of the danger. I needed to protect them. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, my fingers trembling. As I spoke to the operator, I heard the man moving around outside. He was checking the windows, trying to find a way in. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but it would take time given the remote location. I locked all the doors and windows, my heart pounding in my chest. The man's movements were erratic, like he was desperate. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the back of the house. I ran to the kitchen and saw that he had broken a window. He was trying to climb in. Panic surged through me. I grabbed a large kitchen knife and shouted, "Stay back. I've called the police." The man paused, staring at me with wild eyes. "You don't understand. I need to find it. They took something from me." He started to crawl through the window, and I knew I had to act. I swung the knife towards him, not to hurt him, but to scare him off. He yelped and fell back, retreating to the yard. I ran upstairs to check on the kids. They were still asleep, blissfully unaware of the chaos. I barricaded their door with a dresser, my mind racing with fear and adrenaline. From the upstairs window, I saw the man pacing around his car, shouting to himself. He looked up and saw me watching. "You can't keep me out forever. I'll get what's mine," he screamed. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, I heard the distant wail of sirens. The man must have heard them too, because he jumped into his car and sped off, tires screeching on the gravel. The police arrived and searched the area, but the man was long gone. I explained everything to the officers, my voice still shaking. They reassured me that they'd patrol the area and keep an eye out for the car. When the Johnsons returned, they were horrified by what had happened. They didn't know anyone who matched the description of the man, and they couldn't think of anything he might have been looking for. I quit babysitting after that night. The memory of those frantic moments stayed with me, the feeling of being watched, of danger lurking just outside. Even now, I double-check the locks on my doors and windows, always alert, never wanting to experience that terror again. Living in a high-rise apartment in the city had its perks. The view was amazing, and I felt safe being so high up. I had been there for about 6 months and everything was pretty routine. I worked from home most days, so I got to know the comings and goings of my neighbors and the building staff. There was one maintenance worker, Joe, who seemed to always be around. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was friendly enough, always saying hi in the hallways and offering to help with small things. But then I started noticing little things that made me uneasy. It seemed like every time I left my apartment, Joe was there, either in the hallway or on my floor. It felt like too much of a coincidence. One day, I was in my living room working when I heard a noise coming from the ventilation system. It wasn't loud, just a faint rustling. I brushed it off as normal building noises. But then it happened again and again, each time sounding more deliberate. It felt like someone was moving around in there. I started to feel paranoid, thinking that maybe someone was watching me. I mentioned it to a friend, who laughed it off and said I was overreacting. But I couldn't shake the feeling. One evening, I decided to cover the fence in my living room and bedroom with tape, just to see if anything changed. The next morning, the tape was torn off. My heart pounded as I realized that someone had been in my apartment while I was asleep. I went to the building management to report my concerns. They assured me that all employees were trustworthy and that there was no way anyone could get into the ventilation system. But I couldn't believe them. I started to feel like I was losing my mind, imagining things that couldn't possibly be real. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. They were faint but unmistakable, coming from the living room. I lay still, my heart racing. I reached for my phone and dialed 911, whispering my address and situation to the dispatcher. As I did, I heard the footsteps getting closer. I locked my bedroom door and grabbed a baseball bat from under my bed. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I held my breath, clutching the bat so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then, there was a soft knock. "It's Joe," a voice whispered. "I just need to check something in your apartment." I didn't respond. Instead, I listened as he jiggled the doorknob. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me, assuring me that the police were on their way. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, the silence pressing in on me. Finally, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. Joe must have heard them too because he cursed under his breath and retreated. When the police arrived, they found Joe hiding in the maintenance room on my floor. He had keys to all the apartments and had been using the ventilation system to spy on residents. They arrested him, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered sense of security. The building management apologized profusely and offered to upgrade my security system, but the damage was done. I couldn't stay there, knowing what had happened. I moved out within a week, finding a new place where I hoped I could start to feel safe again. It took a long time to shake the feeling of being watched. Even now, I find myself double-checking locks and glancing at vents with suspicion. The experience left me wary, always on edge, never fully trusting the safety of my surroundings. I was babysitting in a wealthy neighborhood, a house I'd been to a few times before. It was a large, old home with lots of rooms and hallways that seemed to go on forever. The kids were easy to look after and usually went to bed without much fuss. This time was no different. By 8:30, they were both asleep. After they were in bed, I settled on the couch in the living room with my laptop to watch a movie. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but I was used to the eerie stillness of big houses. Around 9:30, I heard a faint noise coming from the basement. At first, I thought it was just the house settling or maybe the kids moving in their sleep. But the noise came again, this time louder and more distinct, like something being moved. I tried to ignore it, but my curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and headed towards the basement door. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, and the air grew colder with each step. When I reached the bottom, I shone the flashlight around the room. There were the usual items you'd expect: old furniture, boxes, and a washing machine. But then I noticed a door at the far end of the room, one I hadn't seen before. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint light coming from inside. My heart was racing as I approached it. I pushed the door open slowly, revealing a hidden room. It was small, with shelves lining the walls filled with documents, cash, and what looked like drugs. My stomach dropped. This was clearly something illegal. As I stepped further into the room, I saw a table in the center with even more documents spread out. There were photos of people, some of them looking like surveillance shots. I realized I was in way over my head. Just as I was about to back out, I heard the front door open upstairs. The homeowner was back, much earlier than expected. Panic set in. I quickly turned off the flashlight and tried to quietly close the hidden door. I hoped he wouldn't come down to the basement, but my lock ran out. I heard his footsteps on the floor above, heading towards the basement stairs. I had nowhere to hide except behind some boxes near the washing machine. The footsteps grew louder as he descended. He was talking to someone on his phone, saying something about the package being ready for pickup. I held my breath, trying to stay as still as possible. He walked past my hiding spot and went straight to the hidden room. I could hear him moving things around, probably checking on whatever illegal operation he had going on. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to get out without being caught. The only way out was past him, up the stairs, and out the front door. I had to wait for the right moment. After what felt like an eternity, I heard him muttering to himself and then heading back towards the stairs. He paused for a moment, and I feared he might hear my frantic heartbeat. He finally went upstairs, and I heard the front door close behind him. I waited a few minutes to make sure he was really gone. Then, I crept out of my hiding spot and dashed up the stairs as quietly as possible. I checked on the kids to make sure they were still asleep and unharmed. They were fine, oblivious to the danger I had just encountered. I knew I couldn't stay in the house. I called the parents, trying to sound calm, and told them there was an emergency and they needed to come home. I didn't give any details over the phone. They said they were on their way. I packed up my things and waited by the front door, ready to bolt if anything else happened. When the parents arrived, I quickly explained what I had found in the basement. They were shocked but thanked me for letting them know. I left as soon as they were back, still shaken by the experience. The next day, I heard from a mutual friend that the homeowner had been arrested. The police had raided the house and found all the evidence in the hidden room. I felt a sense of relief, knowing that I had done the right thing by reporting it. But the fear and adrenaline from that night stayed with me for a long time. I never took another babysitting job in that neighborhood again. I was looking after a 6-year-old boy, Max, in a remote lake house. The house was beautiful but isolated, surrounded by dense woods and a large, quiet lake. Max's parents had left for a weekend getaway, trusting me to take care of him. It was a Friday evening, and the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows over the property. Max and I had dinner, then watched a movie before he went to bed around 8 p.m. I tucked him in, read him a story, and soon he was asleep. I went back downstairs to the living room, planning to read a book until I got sleepy. The house was eerily silent, with only the occasional creak from the wooden structure. Around 9:30 p.m., I heard a faint knocking sound. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe an animal outside. But the knocking grew louder and more persistent. I got up and went to the window. That's when I saw him, a man standing outside, partially illuminated by the porch light. He looked disheveled, his clothes dirty and worn. He knocked again, harder this time. I felt a chill run down my spine. I walked to the door and called out, asking what he wanted. He replied in a rough voice, saying he was the previous owner of the house and needed to come inside to retrieve something he had left behind. His tone was demanding, almost aggressive. I didn't open the door. Instead, I told him I couldn't let him in and that he should come back when the owners were home. He started banging on the door, yelling that he needed to get inside now. My heart raced as I backed away from the door. I grabbed my phone and dialed Max's parents, but there was no signal out here. Panic set in. The man continued to pound on the door, his shouts getting louder. I ran upstairs to check on Max. He was still asleep, thankfully. I locked his bedroom door and then went into the master bedroom, which had a view of the front yard. I peeked out the window and saw the man pacing back and forth, looking increasingly agitated. I didn't know what to do. There was no landline in the house, and my phone still had no signal. I thought about trying to make a run for it with Max, but the man was right outside. The minutes felt like hours as I watched him from the window. He suddenly stopped and looked straight at the house, his eyes scanning the windows. I ducked down, hoping he hadn't seen me. The pounding on the door started again, more violently this time. I knew the door wouldn't hold much longer. Desperation took over, and I remembered there was an old hunting rifle in the closet of the master bedroom. I ran to get it, my hands shaking as I fumbled to load it. With the rifle in hand, I went back to the window. The man was now trying to force open a window downstairs. I shouted at him, telling him I had a gun and would shoot if he didn't leave. He stopped and stared up at me, his face twisted with anger and something else I couldn't quite place, fear, maybe. He started yelling obscenities, saying I had no right to be there and that the house was his. I kept the rifle aimed at him, praying he would leave. After a tense few moments, he backed away from the window, still shouting. He finally turned and walked off into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't relax until I was sure he was gone. I checked on Max again, who was still asleep, oblivious to the danger. I stayed up the rest of the night, clutching the rifle and jumping at every sound. The man didn't come back, but I couldn't shake the fear that he might. When morning came, I tried the phone again and finally got a signal. I called Max's parents and told them everything. They were horrified and said they would come back immediately. While waiting for them, I kept the doors locked and stayed alert. Max's parents arrived a few hours later with the police. They searched the property and the surrounding woods but didn't find any trace of the man. The police took my statement and promised to keep an eye on the area. Max's parents thanked me for protecting their son, and I left, still shaken by the whole ordeal. I never babysat at that house again. I was babysitting for the Johnsons one Friday night in their old Victorian house. The place was huge and had that creepy old house vibe. The kids, Timmy and Sarah, were good kids and went to bed without much fuss. Once they were asleep, I settled in the living room with my homework. Around 10 p.m., I heard a thump coming from upstairs. I figured it was the old house settling or maybe the kids tossing in their sleep. But the thumping continued, irregular but persistent. My curiosity got the better of me, so I went to check it out. I crept up the stairs, careful not to make any noise. The sound was coming from the attic. I had never been up there before, but I remembered Mr. Johnson mentioning a locked door. I found the door, a heavy wooden thing with a rusty lock. The thumping was louder here. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I started looking for a way to open the door. I found a small key on a hook nearby, probably for the attic door. The key fit, and with some effort, I turned the lock and pushed the door open. The attic was dusty and full of old furniture, boxes, and cobwebs. The air was thick and musty. I shone my flashlight around, trying to find the source of the noise. It was quiet now, eerily so. I stepped further inside, my heart pounding in my chest. As I moved a stack of boxes, I saw something strange. A large trunk sat in the corner, partially hidden. The trunk looked old, the leather worn and the metal rusted. I hesitated but then decided to open it. Inside, I found old clothes, books, and photos. The photos were black and white, showing a younger Mr. Johnson with people I didn't recognize. Underneath the photos, I found a journal. The entries were disturbing. They spoke of dark secrets, things Mr. Johnson had done in his past. Crimes that he had never been caught for. My hands were shaking as I read through the pages. I realized the thumping had been me knocking things over in my haste to open the trunk. Suddenly, I heard the front door open downstairs. Panic set in. The Johnsons weren't supposed to be back for hours. I quickly put everything back in the trunk, locked the attic door, and rushed downstairs. Mr. Johnson was standing in the hallway, looking at me with a strange expression. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice calm but with an edge to it. I nodded, trying to act normal. "Yeah, just checking on the kids." He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. "Good. Why don't you head back downstairs?" I did as he said, my heart still racing. I sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but my mind was elsewhere. What should I do? Should I call the police? But what if he found out I knew his secret? I was terrified. A little while later, Mrs. Johnson came in with groceries. She seemed cheerful, not sensing the tension. Mr. Johnson stayed upstairs, and I could hear him moving around, possibly checking the attic. I needed to get out of there, but I couldn't leave the kids. I texted a friend, asking them to call me with an excuse to leave. A few minutes later, my phone rang. I answered, pretending it was my mom saying there was an emergency. I told Mrs. Johnson I had to leave. She was understanding and thanked me for coming on short notice. As soon as I got outside, I ran to my car and drove off, my hands shaking. I didn't stop until I was far from the house. I called my parents and told them everything. They were shocked and told me to come home right away. We decided to call the police anonymously. I didn't sleep that night, waiting for the call from the police. When it finally came, they said they found the journal and arrested Mr. Johnson. It turned out he had been involved in some serious crimes years ago, and my discovery had brought it all to light. I moved into a quiet suburban neighborhood about 6 months ago. It was peaceful, the kind of place where everyone seemed friendly and minded their own business. My house was a small, cozy one-story with a big front window that I loved because it let in a lot of light. A couple of weeks after moving in, I noticed my neighbor across the street, Mr. Harris. He was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, with a stooped back and graying hair. At first, He seemed nice enough. We exchanged polite nods and occasional small talk while I was outside tending to my garden or getting the mail. One evening, I was sitting in my living room, reading a book, when I had this strange feeling that someone was watching me. I looked up and saw Mr. Harris standing in his window, staring directly at me. It was unnerving, but I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was looking at something else. The next day, I saw him again, in the same spot, looking my way. This started happening more frequently, to the point where every time I looked out my window, there he was. His eyes followed me whenever I moved around the room. It got to the point where I stopped using my living room and started spending more time in my bedroom, where the windows faced the backyard. One morning, as I was leaving for work, I found a note on my doorstep. It was a piece of paper with the words, "I'm watching you," scribbled in a shaky hand. My heart raced. I looked around, but the street was empty. I threw the note away, hoping it was some kind of prank. But the notes kept coming. Every few days, there would be another one. "You can't hide from me. I see everything you do. You belong to me." The messages were getting more disturbing, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried talking to Mr. Harris a few times, casually bringing up the notes without directly accusing him, but he always acted clueless and concerned. Yet, the notes continued to appear, always when I wasn't home. One night, I woke up to a tapping sound. I got up and looked out the window, but there was nothing there. The tapping continued, louder and more insistent. It was coming from the front of the house. I peeked out the living room window and saw Mr. Harris standing on my porch, tapping on the window with a stick. I froze, unsure of what to do. He was muttering something, but I couldn't make out the words. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator about the situation. She told me to stay on the line and that officers were on their way. I watched from the shadows as Mr. Harris continued to tap and mutter. It felt like an eternity before I saw the flashing lights of the police car. The officers approached him, and he backed away, looking confused and frightened. They talked to him for a while before coming to my door. They told me Mr. Harris seemed disoriented and claimed he didn't know why he was there. They suggested he might have dementia and recommended I get a restraining order. I felt a little bad for him, but I couldn't shake the fear that had settled in my bones. The restraining order didn't stop him. He stayed away for a few days, but then I started seeing him in his window again, watching me. The notes returned, now with more disturbing content. "I will get you. You can't escape me." I was living in a constant state of fear. I decided to install security cameras around my house. One night, the cameras caught him sneaking around my yard, leaving a note on my back porch. The footage was enough for the police to take more serious action. They arrested him, and I finally felt a small sense of relief. But it wasn't over. Even with him in custody, I felt like I was always being watched. I couldn't shake the paranoia. I kept the cameras on, checked them constantly, and barely slept. I jumped at every little noise, expecting him to be there, watching me. After a few weeks, I got a call from the police. Mr. Harris had been released due to lack of evidence. I was terrified. That same night, I heard tapping on my window again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and called the police immediately. The officers arrived quickly, but Mr. Harris was already gone. They found another note on my porch. "I told you, you can't escape me." They increased patrols in my neighborhood and advised me to stay with friends or family until things settled down. I moved in with a friend across town. I couldn't go back to that house. I put it up for sale and never returned. To this day, I still have nightmares about Mr. Harris and those notes. I don't know what happened to him after I moved, and I don't want to know. I just hope he never finds me again. I had agreed to watch the Johnson kids for the weekend while their parents went on a much-needed vacation. They owned a cozy cabin in the woods, a perfect getaway spot that was far from the hustle and bustle of the city. The place was charming, with a rustic feel and a large deck that overlooked the forest. The first night was uneventful. I made dinner for the kids, we played some board games, and I put them to bed by 9 p.m. After they were asleep, I settled on the couch with a book, enjoying the quiet and the crackling of the fireplace. Around midnight, I heard a faint clicking noise. I figured it was just the owls settling and went to bed. The next day, we spent most of the time outside. The kids loved exploring the woods, and I kept a close eye on them as they played. By the time we got back to the cabin, they were exhausted. I made dinner, and we followed the same routine as the previous night. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I heard the clicking noise again. It was faint but persistent. It seemed to be coming from the living room. I got up to investigate and noticed a small black device tucked in the corner of a bookshelf. It was a camera, and the little red light was blinking. I felt a chill run down my spine. I carefully removed the camera and examined it. It was a high-quality hidden camera, not something you would expect to find in a family cabin. I searched the room and found another one behind a picture frame. My heart started racing. Someone had been watching us. I quickly checked the rest of the cabin. I found cameras in the kitchen, the hallway, even one in the bathroom. There was no way these had been placed by accident. I had no idea how long they had been there or who put them there. I called the Johnsons, but there was no answer. I left a message, trying to stay calm, and told them about the cameras. I didn't want to scare the kids, so I decided not to tell them anything yet. I gathered the cameras I had found and put them in a bag. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump, and I kept checking the windows and doors. I felt like we were being watched, and I couldn't shake the feeling. Early in the morning, I decided to take the kids into town. I didn't want to stay in the cabin another minute. As we were packing up, I found another camera in the kids' room, hidden in a stuffed animal. I felt sick to my stomach. I grabbed the kids and told them we were going on a little trip. They didn't seem to mind, they were excited to go into town. We drove to the nearest police station and I reported the cameras. The officers took it seriously and said they would investigate. They advised us to stay away from the cabin until they had checked it out. I felt a bit of relief knowing they were handling it. The Johnsons called me back later that day, horrified by what I had found. They said they had no idea who could have put the cameras there. They decided to cut their trip short and come back immediately. The police found a total of 15 cameras hidden throughout the cabin. They were all connected to a remote recording device that had been hidden in the attic. It seemed like whoever had set this up had been watching the family for a long time. The investigation revealed that the cameras had been installed by the previous owner, a man who had sold the cabin to the Johnsons about a year ago. He had a history of voyeurism and had been using the cameras to spy on the occupants. He was arrested, but the damage was already done. The Johnsons felt violated and decided to sell the cabin. The experience left me shaken. I couldn't believe how easily our privacy had been invaded. I kept thinking about how long that man had been watching them, and what he might have seen. It took me a long time to feel safe again, and I was much more cautious about my surroundings. The Johnsons moved to a new house in the city, and I continued to babysit for them, but things were never quite the same. We were all a little more wary. I agreed to babysit for the Seabrooks while they went out for a rare night alone. They had rented a beautiful beachside home for a week, and I was thrilled to spend the evening there. The house was perfect, with big windows overlooking the ocean, and the sound of waves crashing outside. The evening started out normally. I made dinner for little Emma and put her to bed around 8. The Seabrooks had mentioned that she liked to listen to the ocean sounds as she fell asleep, so I left her window slightly open. After she was asleep, I settled in the living room with a book. Around 9, I heard a noise outside. It sounded like someone walking on the gravel path leading to the house. I got up and looked out the window but didn't see anyone. I told myself it was just my imagination and went back to my book. About half an hour later, I heard the noise again. This time, it was louder, and I was sure it was footsteps. I felt a chill run down my spine. I checked the locks on the doors and windows, making sure everything was secure. I didn't want to call the Seabrooks and ruin their night out, so I decided to wait and see if it happened again. At 10, I heard a soft knock on the front door. My heart started pounding. I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. There was a man standing outside. He looked disheveled, with messy hair and dirty clothes. He knocked again, louder this time. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is this the Seabrooks' house?" he asked. His voice was rough and sounded almost desperate. "Who are you?" I asked, not opening the door. "I need to speak with Mr. Seabrook," he said. "It's urgent." I didn't like the sound of this. I backed away from the door and grabbed my phone. I was about to call the Seabrooks when I heard the man trying the doorknob. I froze. He was trying to get in. I ran to the back of the house and locked myself in the bathroom. I dialed Mr. Seabrook's number with shaking hands. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Seabrook, there's a man outside," I whispered. "He's trying to get in." There was a pause. Then, he said, "Stay where you are. Don't open the door. I'm calling the police." "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said. "I have a restraining order against a stalker. He's dangerous. We thought we'd be safe here." My blood ran cold. I heard a loud crash from the front of the house. The man had broken a window. I could hear him moving around inside, searching for us. "I'm scared," I whispered. "Stay hidden," Mr. Seabrook said. "The police are on their way." I heard footsteps coming down the hall. They stopped outside the bathroom door. The doorknob rattled. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't get in. The door shook as he tried to force it open. "Come out," the man shouted. "I know you're in there." I heard sirens in the distance. The man cursed and ran back down the hall. I heard him leave through the broken window. I stayed in the bathroom, too scared to move, until I heard the police arrive. They found the man hiding in the bushes outside. He was arrested and taken away. The Seabrooks came home immediately, apologizing over and over for not telling me about the restraining order. They had hoped to keep it a secret so I wouldn't be scared. I stayed with them until the window was repaired, then went home. I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had come to being hurt. The Seabrooks cut their vacation short and went back to the city, where they felt safer. I never babysat for them again. The experience left me too shaken. I still think about that night sometimes, wondering what might have happened if the police hadn't arrived in time. I'm just glad I got out safe. I agreed to babysit for the Carmichaels while they attended a late-night gala in the city. Their mansion sat atop a hill, surrounded by dense woods that stretched out into the darkness. The house itself was a sprawling old mansion with creaky floors and heavy drapes that blocked out most of the moonlight. The evening started off uneventfully. I arrived around 6, greeted by Mrs. Carmichael, who hurriedly gave me instructions and left with her husband shortly after. The children, Sarah and Michael, were already in their pajamas and engrossed in a cartoon when I arrived. Mrs. Carmichael assured me they would be fine and that they usually went to bed early. After dinner, I settled down in the living room, flipping through channels on the TV while keeping an eye on the kids. Around 9, I decided to check on them. Sarah was fast asleep with her favorite stuffed animal tucked under her arm, but Michael was wide awake, staring at the ceiling with a toy in his hand. I tucked Michael in again and assured him everything was okay before returning to the living room. It was then that I noticed something odd. The security monitor on the wall flickered occasionally, displaying brief static or distorted images. Curious, I walked over to inspect it. The monitor showed various camera views of the perimeter of the mansion. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but as I watched, I noticed shadows moving across the lawn. They were subtle, darting movements that suggested someone was lurking outside, trying to stay hidden. My heart began to race. I realized that the security system had been tampered with. Someone had disabled part of it, allowing them to approach the mansion undetected. Panic set in as I thought about Sarah and Michael upstairs, vulnerable in their beds. I grabbed my phone to call Mr. and Mrs. Carmichael, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial the number. Mr. Carmichael answered after a few rings, and I blurted out what I had seen. His voice was tense as he told me to stay calm and lock all the doors and windows. I rushed through the house, securing every entry point I could find. The mansion felt like a labyrinth in the dim light, the old floorboards creaking underfoot. Every noise made me jump, wondering if it was the intruder trying to get in. Back in the living room, I kept an eye on the security monitor. The shadows outside were still there, moving cautiously around the perimeter. I strained to see more details, but the camera angles were limited, and the night was too dark to make out much. Then, I heard it, a soft scraping sound coming from the kitchen. My heart skipped a beat. I crept toward the kitchen, trying to stay quiet. The scraping grew louder, accompanied by the occasional thud as if something heavy was being moved. I peeked around the corner and saw a figure, a man, standing by the kitchen window. He was trying to pry it open with a tool, his face hidden in the darkness. Fear clenched my stomach as I backed away silently, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. I considered waking the children and hiding with them, but the risk of alerting the intruder kept me frozen in place. Instead, I retreated to the living room and dialed 911, whispering urgently to the dispatcher about the situation. They assured me that officers were on their way and instructed me to stay on the line. The minutes dragged by agonizingly slow. I kept my eyes glued to the security monitor, watching the shadowy figure outside the kitchen. He seemed to sense the police were coming because he suddenly stepped away from the window and disappeared into the darkness. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The lights in the mansion flickered, then went out completely. I was plunged into darkness, my only light coming from the faint glow of my phone screen. The house felt eerily quiet now, the usual creaks and groans amplified in the stillness. I heard footsteps upstairs, the unmistakable sound of someone moving through the halls above me. Terror seized my chest as I realized the intruder was inside the mansion. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to control my breathing, praying that the police would arrive soon. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance. The intruder must have heard them too, because he suddenly bolted down the stairs and sprinted for the front door. I heard the crash of glass breaking as he escaped into the night. Moments later, police officers flooded into the mansion, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They swept the house, securing each room before finally finding me in the living room. They took my statement and assured me that they would search the area thoroughly. Mr. and Mrs. Carmichael arrived home shortly afterward, pale and visibly shaken. They thanked me profusely for keeping their children safe and apologized for the terrifying ordeal. They explained that they had been targeted before by an obsessed former employee who had been fired for threatening behavior. I left the mansion that night with a police escort, my nerves frayed and my mind reeling from the close call. I was babysitting one evening in a quiet townhouse. The parents had left around 7 p.m., and the house was still. It was just me and the little boy, Jacob. He was 4 years old, full of energy, but thankfully settled down early that night. I put him to bed, read him a story, and turned off the lights in his room. The townhouse was a 2-story unit. Downstairs had the living room and kitchen, while upstairs had the bedrooms. I settled on the couch with a book, feeling at ease in the quiet. The parents would be back around midnight, and I had a few hours to myself. It was around 9 p.m. when I first heard the sound. It was faint, a soft thud, like something landing on the roof. I paused, listening intently. Maybe it was just a branch or some animal. I tried to ignore it and went back to my book. A few minutes later, I heard another noise, this time louder. Footsteps. It was unmistakable. Someone was walking on the roof. My heart started to race. I put down the book and strained to listen. The footsteps were moving slowly, deliberately, across the roof. I stood up, unsure of what to do. The sound of footsteps continued, moving towards the back of the house. Panic began to set in. I grabbed my phone and quickly dialed the parents. No answer. I left a hurried message, trying to stay calm. Then, I heard a different noise. A scraping sound, like metal against metal. It was coming from upstairs, near the back window. Someone was trying to break in. I looked up the stairs, feeling trapped. Jacob was asleep in his room, unaware of the danger. I couldn't leave him. I had to protect him. I moved quietly to the bottom of the stairs, trying to think of a plan. The scraping continued, more insistent now. I needed to do something, anything, to stop whoever was trying to get in. I crept up the stairs, each step slow and silent. The noise was coming from the hallway window. I could see the silhouette of a figure outside, fiddling with the window latch. I felt a surge of fear but also determination. I couldn't let this person get inside. I grabbed a heavy lamp from a nearby table and approached the window. The figure didn't seem to notice me. My heart was pounding in my ears as I raised the lamp, ready to defend the house and the child sleeping just a few feet away. Suddenly, the window burst open, and the figure started to climb in. I swung the lamp with all my strength, hitting the intruder on the arm. They yelped in pain and lost their balance, falling back out the window. I heard a loud thud as they hit the ground below. I slammed the window shut and locked it, my hands shaking. I peeked out the window, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. I could hear movement, though, the sound of someone scrambling away. I ran back to Jacob's room, checking to make sure he was still safe. He was still asleep, undisturbed by the noise. I felt a rush of relief, but I knew I couldn't let my guard down. I called the police, explaining what had happened. They assured me they would send someone right away. I sat by Jacob's bed, watching the door, ready to protect him if the intruder came back. It felt like an eternity, but finally, I heard the sound of sirens. The police arrived, and I ran downstairs to let them in. I told them everything, from the footsteps on the roof to the figure trying to climb in the window. They searched the area but didn't find anyone. They assured me they would patrol the neighborhood and keep an eye out. They also recommended I stay somewhere else for the night, just to be safe. I called the parents again, finally reaching them. They rushed home, and I told them what had happened. They were horrified but grateful that Jacob and I were safe. They insisted on driving me home and promised to increase their security. I couldn't sleep that night. Every little sound made me jump. The image of the intruder trying to climb in the window haunted me. I kept thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't been there, if I hadn't acted. The next day, I went back to check on Jacob and the family. They had installed new locks and security cameras. They thanked me again, calling me a hero, but I didn't feel like one. I was just glad we were all safe. That night changed me. I became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. I never took safety for granted again. And I never babysat in a secluded townhouse after dark. I was home alone in my small apartment on a Friday night. It had been a long week, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening. I had just settled down with a movie and some takeout when I heard a knock on the door. It was unexpected. I wasn't expecting any visitors. I got up, feeling a little uneasy. I walked over to the door and looked through the peephole. There was a man standing there in a delivery uniform, holding a package. I didn't order anything, so I opened the door just a crack, leaving the chain on. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Delivery for you," he said, holding up the package. "I didn't order anything," I replied, starting to feel more suspicious. He insisted, "Maybe it's a gift or something. You should check it out." Something felt off. His eyes didn't meet mine, and his tone was a little too insistent. I told him again, "I think you have the wrong apartment." Before I could close the door, he shoved it hard, breaking the chain and forcing his way in. I stumbled back, shocked and terrified. He shut the door behind him and locked it. I was trapped. "What's going on?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Shut up," he snarled, grabbing my arm and pushing me against the wall. His grip was painful, and I could feel his breath on my face. Panic set in. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. He started looking around my apartment, still holding onto my arm. "Where's your phone?" he demanded. I lied, "I don't have one." But he saw it on the coffee table and lunged for it. I took the chance to run toward the kitchen, hoping to find something to defend myself with. I grabbed a kitchen knife, my hand shaking. He saw me and laughed. "What are you going to do with that?" I stood my ground, holding the knife out in front of me. "Get out of my apartment," I yelled, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He took a step towards me, and I slashed at him with the knife. It caught his arm, and he yelled in pain and anger. He backed up, clutching his arm. "You're gonna pay for that," he growled. I seized the moment and ran for the door, but he was faster. He grabbed me again, slamming me against the wall. The knife fell from my hand, and I felt a wave of helplessness. He started dragging me towards the bedroom. I fought back with everything I had, kicking and scratching. "Help! Someone help me!" I screamed, hoping the neighbors would hear. He slapped me hard across the face, and I saw stars. "Shut up," he hissed, but the commotion seemed to draw attention. There was a sudden pounding on the door. "Hey! What's going on in there?" a voice shouted from the hallway. The man hesitated, loosening his grip on me. I took the chance and kicked him as hard as I could, making him stumble back. I ran to the door and unlocked it, throwing it open. My neighbor, an older man named Mr. Thompson, stood there with a baseball bat. "Get out of here," he yelled at the intruder. The man took one look at Mr. Thompson and decided it wasn't worth it. He bolted out the door, pushing past Mr. Thompson and disappearing down the stairs. I collapsed on the floor, shaking and crying. Mr. Thompson helped me up and called the police. I could hardly speak, my mind reeling from what just happened. The police arrived quickly and took my statement. They assured me they would do everything they could to find the man. The hours that followed were a blur of questions, statements, and a visit to the hospital to check my injuries. I was physically okay, but the fear and violation I felt were overwhelming. The police promised to patrol the area more frequently, and I decided to stay with a friend for a few days. Returning to my apartment was hard. Every noise made me jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I changed the locks and installed a security system. It took a long time to feel safe again. I never found out who the man was or why he targeted me. The police had some leads, but he was never caught. The incident left a scar, a reminder of how quickly things can change. Now, I always check the peephole and keep the chain on. I don't open the door unless I'm sure of who's on the other side. I was babysitting for the Buckinghams one Friday night. They had a nice house in a quiet suburb, and their son, Tommy, was always well behaved. It was supposed to be an easy job: put Tommy to bed, watch some TV, and get paid. I had no idea how wrong I was. Tommy was already in his pajamas when I arrived. Mrs. Buckingham gave me the usual rundown. Tommy's bedtime is at 8:30. Snacks are in the kitchen. Call if you need anything. They left, and it was just me and Tommy. We played a few games, and then I let him watch some cartoons while I scrolled through my phone. Everything seemed normal until I noticed Tommy kept glancing at the door. I asked him if something was wrong, and he just shook his head. I didn't think much of it at the time. After dinner, I told Tommy it was time to get ready for bed. He protested a bit but eventually went upstairs. I tucked him in, read him a story, and he fell asleep pretty quickly. I went back downstairs and settled on the couch, ready for a quiet evening. Around 9 p.m., I heard a noise coming from upstairs. It sounded like whispering. I thought Tommy might be talking in his sleep, so I went to check on him. When I opened his door, I saw the glow of a screen under his blanket. He had a tablet. "Tommy, what are you doing?" "It's bedtime," I said, pulling the blanket off. He looked scared and tried to hide the tablet. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was just talking to my friend." I took the tablet from him and saw a chat window open. The messages were from someone named Mike. My heart sank when I read the messages. They were asking Tommy about his house, who was with him, and if the babysitter was pretty. The last message sent chills down my spine. "I'm coming to visit." I immediately shut off the tablet and asked Tommy how he knew this Mike. He told me he met him online while playing games. I told Tommy to stay in his room and lock the door. I went downstairs and called the police, explaining everything to them. They said they'd send someone over right away. While I waited, I locked all the doors and windows. I kept peeking outside, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. The minutes felt like hours. I was scared but tried to stay calm for Tommy's sake. Then, there was a knock at the door. It was soft at first, then more insistent. I looked through the peephole but saw nothing. My heart was pounding. I backed away from the door, my mind racing with fear. Another knock, louder this time. Then, a voice. "Hey, I know you're in there." "Open up." It was a man's voice, deep and threatening. I grabbed a kitchen knife and hid behind the couch, praying the police would arrive soon. The knocking turned into banging. "Open the door, or I'll break it down," the voice yelled. I could hear the doorknob rattling, and the door creaking under the pressure. I clutched the knife tighter, my hands shaking. Just when I thought the door would give in, I heard sirens in the distance. The banging stopped, and I peeked out from behind the couch. The man was gone. The police arrived a few moments later, and I ran to open the door for them. I told the officers everything. They checked the house and the surroundings but didn't find anyone. They took the tablet as evidence and assured me they would investigate. I called the Buckinghams and explained what happened. They rushed home, terrified and grateful that Tommy and I were safe. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise made me jump. I kept thinking about how easily it could have gone differently. The police never caught the guy, but they did trace the messages back to a known predator. The Buckinghams were more careful with Tommy's online activities after that, and I decided to stick to babysitting during the day. The experience left me shaken. I still babysit, but I'm much more cautious now. I always keep an eye on what the kids are doing online and make sure all the doors are locked. I was babysitting for the Thompsons one Saturday night. They lived in a big old farmhouse way out in the country, far from the nearest town. Their kids, Emily and Jake, were usually easy to handle. It seemed like it would be another simple job: keep the kids entertained, get them to bed, and wait for their parents to come home. I had no idea how wrong I was. Emily and Jake were already in their pajamas when I got there. Mrs. Thompson gave me the usual instructions: bedtime at 8:30, snacks in the kitchen, call if you need anything. They left, and it was just me and the kids. We played some board games, and then I let them watch a movie while I scrolled through my phone. Everything seemed normal until I noticed Jake kept looking out the window. I asked him if something was wrong, but he just shook his head. I didn't think much of it at the time. After dinner, I told the kids it was time to get ready for bed. Emily protested a bit, but they both eventually went upstairs. I tucked them in, read them a story, and they fell asleep pretty quickly. I went back downstairs and settled on the couch, ready for a quiet night. Around 9 p.m., I heard a noise coming from outside. It sounded like a loud crack, almost like thunder, but the sky was clear. I thought it might have been a tree branch breaking, so I went to check it out. When I opened the door, I saw nothing but darkness and the silhouette of the trees against the moonlit sky. I closed the door and went back inside, feeling a bit uneasy. A few minutes later, I heard the noise again, this time followed by a distant shout. My heart started pounding. It sounded like gunshots. I knew there were poachers in the area sometimes, but I never thought I'd encounter them. I rushed upstairs to check on the kids. They were both sound asleep. I didn't want to wake them, but I felt like I needed to do something to keep them safe. I locked all the doors and windows, trying to stay calm. Suddenly, I heard more gunshots, much closer this time. Panic set in. I grabbed the phone and called the police, explaining the situation. They said they'd send someone over right away, but I knew it would take them a while to get out here. I crept back downstairs, trying to keep quiet. I peeked out the window and saw flashlights moving through the trees. There were at least 2, maybe 3 people out there, and they were getting closer. I could hear them talking, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I decided to hide with the kids. I went back upstairs and gently woke them up, telling them we needed to hide. Emily started to cry, but I told her to be brave. We hid in the closet in their parents' bedroom, the safest place I could think of. We sat there in the dark, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. The voices outside were getting louder, and the flashlight beams were sweeping across the windows. I held the kids close, praying the police would arrive soon. Then, we heard footsteps on the porch. My heart stopped. Someone was trying the front door. They rattled the handle, then banged on it. "Open up. We know you're in there," a man's voice shouted. I could feel the kids trembling beside me. I held my breath, hoping they would give up and leave. But the banging continued, and then I heard a window shatter. They were coming in. I whispered to the kids to stay quiet and not move. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold onto them. The intruders were inside now, moving through the house. I could hear them opening doors and searching rooms. "Check upstairs," one of them said. My heart sank. They were coming for us. Just as I heard the footsteps on the stairs, we heard sirens in the distance. The intruders must have heard them too, because they started cursing and ran back downstairs. I heard them scramble out the broken window and disappear into the night. I waited until I was sure they were gone before coming out of the closet. I took the kids back downstairs, and we waited by the door until the police arrived. When they did, I ran out to meet them, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. I told the officers everything. They searched the property and the surrounding area but didn't find anyone. They took statements and assured me they would keep a close watch on the area. I called the Thompsons and explained what happened. They rushed home, terrified but grateful that we were all safe. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise made me jump. I kept thinking about how easily it could have gone differently. The police never caught the poachers, but they increased patrols in the area. The Thompsons were more cautious about leaving the kids alone after that, and I decided to stick to babysitting in town. I was babysitting for the Bakers one Thursday night. They lived in an affluent neighborhood, the kind with wide streets and big houses. Their daughter, Lily, was sweet and easy to watch. It was supposed to be an ordinary job: keep Lily entertained, get her to bed, and wait for her parents to come home. I had no idea how wrong I was. Lily was already in her pajamas when I arrived. Mr. Baker gave me the usual instructions: bedtime at 8:30, snacks are in the kitchen, call if you need anything. Then he left, and it was just me and Lily. We played some board games, and then I let her watch a movie while I checked my phone. Everything seemed normal until I noticed Lily kept glancing at the front door. I asked her if something was wrong, but she just shook her head. I didn't think much of it at the time. After dinner, I told Lily it was time to get ready for bed. She protested a bit but eventually went upstairs. I tucked her in, read her a story, and she fell asleep pretty quickly. I went back downstairs and settled on the couch, ready for a quiet night. Around 9 p.m., I heard a noise coming from outside. It sounded like a car door slamming. I thought maybe Mr. Baker had forgotten something and come back. I went to check, but when I looked out the window, I didn't see anyone. I closed the door and went back inside, feeling a bit uneasy. A few minutes later, I heard the noise again, this time louder. My heart started pounding. I knew the Bakers weren't supposed to be home yet. I looked out the window again and saw a man standing by a car in the driveway. He looked like Mr. Baker, but something felt off. I decided to ignore it and went back to watching TV. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I jumped up, my heart racing. I opened it just a crack and saw the same man standing there. He smiled at me, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hi, I'm here to pick up Lily," he said. "Mr. Baker asked me to." Something didn't feel right. I hesitated, and he pushed the door open wider. "It's okay," he said, stepping inside. "I'm a family friend." I stepped back, unsure of what to do. "I need to call Mr. Baker," I said, trying to sound confident. He smiled again, but this time it was more like a smirk. "There's no need for that," he said, shutting the door behind him. "He knows I'm here." I backed away, my hands shaking. "Please, I need to call him," I insisted. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight and painful. "You're not calling anyone," he said, dragging me into the living room. He shoved me onto the couch and stood over me, his eyes cold and menacing. I glanced towards the stairs, thinking about Lily sleeping upstairs. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice trembling. He pulled out a gun and pointed it at me. "You're going to sit here quietly and not make a sound," he said. "If you do anything stupid, the girl gets hurt." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I nodded, too scared to speak. He sat down across from me, the gun never leaving his hand. We sat there in tense silence for what felt like hours. I kept thinking about Lily, hoping she wouldn't wake up and come downstairs. I didn't know who this man was, but it was clear he wasn't a friend of the Bakers. Eventually, I heard footsteps on the stairs. My heart sank. Lily appeared at the top, rubbing her eyes. "I heard noises," she said sleepily. "What's going on?" The man stood up and pointed the gun at her. "Come down here, Lily," he said, his voice smooth but threatening. She looked at me, confused and scared. "Do what he says," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She came down the stairs slowly, her eyes wide with fear. The man grabbed her arm and pulled her to him. "We're leaving," he said. "And you're coming with us." I didn't know what to do. I was terrified, but I knew I had to protect Lily. "Please," I begged. "Let her go. She's just a child." He ignored me and started dragging Lily towards the door. I couldn't let him take her. Summoning all my courage, I lunged at him, trying to wrestle the gun from his hand. There was a struggle, and in the chaos, the gun went off. The sound was deafening. I felt a searing pain in my shoulder and fell to the ground. Lily screamed. The man kicked me aside and grabbed Lily, dragging her out the door. I tried to get up, but the pain was too much. I could hear the sound of the car starting and driving away. I crawled to the phone and called the police, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. I told them what happened and begged them to hurry. The police arrived within minutes. They called for an ambulance and started searching the area for the man and Lily. I was taken to the hospital, my mind racing with fear for Lily. It took hours, but the police eventually found them. The man had taken Lily to an abandoned house a few miles away. She was scared but unharmed. The man was arrested and charged with kidnapping and assault. I found out later that the man was a known criminal who had been stalking the Bakers for weeks. He had planned to take Lily and hold her for ransom. The Bakers were horrified and grateful that Lily and I were safe. The experience left me shaken. I still babysit, but I'm much more cautious now. I always make sure the doors are locked and keep an eye out for anything unusual. It's scary to think how close we came to something terrible, but I'm grateful we got out of it safely. I was babysitting for the Wilsons one Saturday night. They lived in a nice house next to a large park. Their two kids, Jack and Emily, were always well behaved. It was supposed to be an easy job: play with the kids, put them to bed, and wait for their parents to come home. I had no idea how wrong I was. Jack and Emily were already in their pajamas when I arrived. Mr. Wilson gave me the usual rundown. Bedtime is at 8:30. Snacks are in the kitchen. Call if you need anything. Then they left, and it was just me and the kids. We played some games, and then I let them watch a movie while I checked my phone. Everything seemed normal until I noticed Jack kept glancing out the window towards the park. I asked him if something was wrong, but he just shook his head. I didn't think much of it at the time. After dinner, I told Jack and Emily it was time to get ready for bed. They protested a bit but eventually went upstairs. I tucked them in, read them a story, and they fell asleep pretty quickly. I went back downstairs and settled on the couch, ready for a quiet night. Around 9 p.m., I heard a noise coming from outside. It sounded like low voices. I thought maybe it was just people walking through the park, so I ignored it. But the voices got louder. Curious, I went to the window and peeked out. There were 3 men standing near the edge of the park, close to the Wilsons' house. They were talking quietly and pointing towards the house. My heart started pounding. Something felt very wrong. I backed away from the window, my mind racing. I needed to secure the house. I checked all the doors and windows, making sure they were locked. Then I went upstairs to check on the kids. They were still asleep, oblivious to the danger outside. I went back downstairs and peeked out the window again. The men were closer now, almost at the edge of the yard. I grabbed my phone and called the police, explaining the situation as calmly as I could. They said they'd send someone over right away. While I waited, I kept an eye on the men. They were now in the yard, moving quietly but quickly towards the house. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I knew I had to do something to protect Jack and Emily. I grabbed a kitchen knife and went back upstairs. I gently woke up Jack and Emily, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to hide," I said. "There are bad men outside." Their eyes widened with fear, but they didn't argue. I led them to the master bedroom and told them to hide in the closet. I stayed by the door, listening for any sounds from downstairs. A few minutes later, I heard a window break. My blood ran cold. I could hear the men talking, their voices getting closer. I held the knife tightly, my hands shaking. I prayed the police would arrive soon. The footsteps came up the stairs, slow and deliberate. I held my breath, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The men were right outside the bedroom door. I could hear them whispering, discussing their plan. The door creaked open, and I saw the shadow of one of the men. He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the area. I stayed hidden behind the door, my heart racing. He moved towards the closet, and I knew I had to act. I lunged at him, the knife in my hand. He turned just in time to see me, and we struggled. I managed to cut his arm, and he screamed in pain. The other men rushed into the room, and I backed away, holding the knife out in front of me. Suddenly, I heard sirens in the distance. The men panicked and ran downstairs. I followed them, keeping my distance. They broke down the back door and fled into the park just as the police arrived. I ran to the front door and opened it for the officers. I told them what happened, my voice shaking. They searched the house and the surrounding area but didn't find the men. They took my statement and assured me they would keep an eye on the neighborhood. I called the Wilsons and explained what happened. They rushed home, terrified and grateful that Jack, Emily, and I were safe. The police stayed until they arrived, making sure everything was secure. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every little noise made me jump. I kept thinking about how easily it could have gone differently. The Wilsons were horrified but grateful. They promised to install better security and be more cautious. I agreed to babysit for Emily while she attended a work event downtown. Her loft apartment was on the 12th floor of a modern building with sleek glass windows that overlooked the city skyline. It was a cozy place, but being up so high made me feel both exhilarated and a bit uneasy. Emily left around 6 in the evening, reminding me that little Max usually went to bed by 8 and gave me her number in case of emergency. Max, a shy 6-year-old with big brown eyes, seemed a bit nervous about his mom leaving, but he warmed up quickly as we played with his toys in the living room. As the sun set and the city lights started to twinkle outside, Max grew quieter, indicating he was ready for bed. I tucked him in with his favorite blanket and a bedtime story, leaving his bedroom door slightly ajar as Emily had instructed. The apartment was silent except for the soft hum of the city below. I settled down on the couch with a book, occasionally glancing at the TV to check the time. Around 9, I heard a faint noise of floorboard creaking in the hallway outside Max's room. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It was too early for Emily to be back, and Max was sound asleep. I tiptoed to Max's room and peeked out into the hallway. At first, I saw nothing but the dimly lit corridor. Then, movement caught my eye as shadows slipping into the guest bathroom at the end of the hall. My stomach churned. I knew Emily was divorced, and her ex-husband had a history of unpredictable behavior. Panic surged through me. I didn't know if he was armed or what he wanted, but I knew I had to protect Max. I hurried back to the living room and grabbed my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed Emily's number. It rang several times before she picked up, her voice muffled by the noise of the event she was attending. "Emily, it's me," I whispered urgently. "There's someone in the apartment." Silence. Then, a sharp intake of breath. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice tense. "Yes," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I heard a noise in the hallway, and I saw a shadow. "I'm calling the police," Emily said quickly. "Stay with Max and lock yourselves in his room. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the phone. I hurried to Max's room, waking him gently and telling him we were going to play a game. He nodded sleepily, his eyes wide with confusion. I closed the bedroom door quietly and locked it, pulling Max into my lap on the floor. Outside, I could hear faint sounds, a door opening, footsteps moving cautiously through the apartment. My heart raced as I listened, praying the police would arrive soon. Minutes stretched into agonizing eternity. Max began to whimper softly, sensing my fear. I hugged him tightly, trying to comfort him while straining to hear any movement outside the bedroom. The sounds seemed to be getting closer. Suddenly, there was a loud crash from the living room, followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps. Max clung to me, his small body trembling. Tears stung my eyes as I realized we were trapped, hiding in the dark while someone prowled through the apartment. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the police to arrive. Just as I was about to call Emily again, I heard voices outside, the deep, authoritative tones of police officers. Relief flooded through me. They were here. Police. "Open up," a voice called from the hallway. I unlocked the bedroom door and peeked out cautiously. 2 officers stood in the hallway, their flashlights sweeping the rooms. I hurried out, clutching Max's hand tightly as we met them. "We heard someone had broken in," one of the officers said, his expression serious. "Is everyone okay?" I nodded, my voice catching in my throat. "I think he's still here," I whispered. I heard noises in the living room. The officers nodded grimly and moved toward the living room, guns drawn. I stayed close to Max, trying to shield him from the sight. Moments later, they emerged with a man in handcuffs, a disheveled figure with wild eyes and a look of desperation. Emily arrived shortly afterward, her face pale with fear and relief. She hugged Max and me tightly, apologizing profusely for what had happened. She explained that her ex-husband had been unstable since their divorce and had recently been making threats. The police took him away, and Emily insisted we wait until they thoroughly searched the apartment. They found no weapons, but his intentions were clear. He had come to confront Emily, and I happened to be caught in the middle. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The sense of danger lingered, making me anxious whenever I was alone in unfamiliar places.